There's 2 volumes of this?
Yeah. All right, here's what the objective for today is. Number 1, we want to finish talking about how President Monroe handled foreign affairs. Okay, we know that we were successful in the War of 1812. That broke with the neutrality that President Washington had established. Monroe takes it a step further. We'll talk about that. Then, if there's any time remaining, we will go into the last of the founding fathers to serve as president. Oh no, that's where we are right now, James Monroe. We will talk about John Quincy Adams, okay, and how John Quincy Adams actually ends the era of good feelings. We'll talk about his election. And once again, we see Congress involved in picking the president as opposed to the people. And then we are out of here for Thanksgiving break. Woo! Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So what we have on the board here is President Monroe consulting his cabinet. We can see representation from across the nation, all the different sections of the country. In the top right over here in the green jacket, looking kind of grumpy, that is John C. Calhoun, Senator from South Carolina. Here talking to the president and advising him on diplomacy matters is John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams will not be a great president, but he might be one of our best diplomats in American history. The shape of our country, its security and that type of thing in this nation building age is strongly credited to him. So just a reminder as to what President Monroe was facing. Number 1, Europe continues to be anti-democratic. There were democratic movements in Italy and Spain that had been squashed. So America faces pressure from the old world in that regard. Number 2, England, controlling Canada, is pressuring the United States to respect all territorial boundaries, which is code for no more taking new territory. Okay. This would slow America down, where Canada is pretty fixed. I mean, there's not too much more that Canada can do as far as expanding territory, but we talked about how Americans, especially in the South, are looking at Spanish territory, or what becomes Mexican territory, with greed in their eyes, thinking this would be a great place to expand our unique institution of slavery. Number 3, the Ruskies. Another sort of European power is the Russian Empire. They are expanding trade posts along the western coast. And as we saw with Lewis and Clark and the Louisiana Purchase, there's this growing sense in America that North America is for the United States. Now, we will talk about manifest destiny down the road, but this idea that God has ordained the United States to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific would be inhibited by European powers. So this is what the Monroe Doctrine does. It's a declaration of sorts. To anyone that will listen, it declares 2 things. First of all, no more colonization. North America, the Western Hemisphere, is closed to European colonization. So hands off. Number 2, it declares that European powers may not intervene in North American affairs. So France, Britain, Spain, Russia, if there's an issue in the Western Hemisphere that concerns you, too bad. You can't intervene. This is not your turf. And that's a direct comment towards Britain, who has been dabbling with colonization in Central America. It's a comment to Spain, who has lost a lot of its territory and that it should not come back. And it's a comment to Russia, right? That really, if there's something going on in the Western Hemisphere, it's not for you to solve. Non-colonization, non-intervention. So, who's going to listen to this? Well, that's kind of questionable. You remember yesterday when we watched the news, China had declared that basically American companies can't talk about Hong Kong as an independent territory, that businesses are expected to call Hong Kong part of China, right? Airport companies, if they're going to do business with Hong Kong or Taiwan, that they have to identify those places as part of China. Okay, that you can't talk about the Tiananmen Square massacre. You can't talk about independence for Taiwan in any kind of way, or else China won't do business with you. That's the kind of diplomatic muscle that America is trying to flex, although we had very little power. So this really ultimately becomes a self-defense doctrine. What I mean by a self-defense doctrine is, if no one is listening, this is still the policy the United States is going to maintain. Monroe is telling the United States as much as he is telling other countries, hey, if we have anyone intervene, anyone colonize, that could be considered an act of war. I'm going to put up a map. Take a look at the map. Okay, we can see what's at stake here. British North America, aka Canada, they've pretty much run out of room to grow. The Russians have been creeping down the coast. Thanks to John Quincy Adams, we will strike out a negotiated deal with them to stop them at what today is the southern border of the Isthmus of Alaska. But really, the only region where growth is possible is out here on the West Coast and in the American Southwest, which is controlled by Spain. So it's time for us to move away from neutrality. It's time for us to take a stand, and it's pretty clear the most robust power, at least in North America, is the American power. There's one more thing we need to note about the Monroe Doctrine. While nobody was really listening at the beginning of the 19th century, towards the end it would play an important role. The turn of the 20th century, President Roosevelt is going to resurrect the Monroe Doctrine when dealing with Spain. Spain, the aged empire, is on its way out. It has territory in the Caribbean, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. And the United States is going to say, remember the Monroe Doctrine? This is not a place for European intervention. And so President Roosevelt especially will rely on the Monroe Doctrine to push that aged empire out and take control of territory in the Caribbean and also in the Pacific. Questions about that? Okay, so I'm going to jump forward here and talk about John Quincy Adams. So James Monroe gives 2 terms, and we accomplish a lot diplomatically. I want to look at John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams is a 1-term president, just like his dad. His father, John Adams, absolutely vital to the American independence movement. Okay, pushing for independence, pushing to write a Declaration of Independence, fighting against Great Britain. We saw a little bit how John Adams was really a driving force with the revolution, even though as president he kept stepping on his own feet. John Quincy Adams is going to be a little bit that way. From the very beginning, he's going to be plagued with accusations of corruption. Now, there's a couple of things you need to know about John Quincy Adams' personality. He was not a corrupt individual. In fact, just like his dad, John Quincy Adams was a man of strong personal character, but very poor interpersonal skills. Okay, he was a cold fish, in other words. In fact, he'll say, my enemies paint me as sort of this uncaring, cold figure, and my worst enemies paint me as somebody who doesn't even have a soul, because he seems so distant, so disconnected. So he wasn't a good politician, but he was an honest man, which means he wasn't a very good politician, right? If he was an honest person. The outcome of the election of 1824 is going to feed into this idea that he was not a good person. Here's what happens, okay? 1824, we have 4 candidates. All of them claim to be Democratic Republican, representing the different regions of the United States. So sectionalism, take a look. John Quincy Adams from Massachusetts, just like his dad. We've got Andrew Jackson, guy on your $20 bill, from Tennessee. In fact, we've got 2 Westerners running for president. The other one is Henry Clay, who is the Speaker of the House. Okay, Kentucky, not as populated as Tennessee. Andrew Jackson, the war hero of New Orleans, Old Hickory. And then from the South, a guy by the name of William Crawford, member of Congress, capable but old as dirt and clearly not a healthy individual because he is going to have a stroke that takes him out of the election. Now, the most popular person running for president is hands down Andrew Jackson, okay? But he does not win a majority of the Electoral College. Remember, the Electoral College is meant to protect from Democratic excesses, from uneducated voters. Well, uneducated voters like Andrew Jackson. Actually, more people vote for Andrew Jackson than the next 2 candidates combined. But there is no majority winner of the Electoral College, and the new 12th Amendment says that when there is no one that receives a majority of electors, the tie-breaking decision goes to the House of Representatives. And the House decides between the 3 top candidates. So that means Henry Clay is out. He finished number 4. But Henry Clay is not gone because he is the Speaker of the House, the most powerful individual in the House of Representatives and highly respected by his peers as the great compromiser. What he says is very important. Henry Clay, Westerner, hates the other Westerner, hates Andrew Jackson, remembers how Andrew Jackson abused his power as a general and goes and basically conquers Florida without permission. He sees Jackson as a dangerous, unstable, violent, angry person, not someone that you would want as a commander-in-chief. So Henry Clay advocates for the election of number 2, John Adams, okay, John Quincy Adams. And you can see John Quincy Adams, while he received quite a few electoral votes from the New England states, actually received quite a few popular votes less than Jackson. So John Quincy Adams becomes president, but the story of Henry Clay working this whole deal out becomes the topic of political scandal. You guys remember in the Hamilton musical, the song, "I want to be in the room where it happens, the room where it happens." This whole idea, like, we today in our political world have no doubt that backdoor deals are part of politics. But in 1824, people still believed that government should run in an open, transparent kind of way. Henry Clay meets with John Quincy Adams before the House votes. John Quincy Adams then becomes president of the United States, and Henry Clay becomes his Secretary of State. Of the past presidents, let's take a look at this. Of the past presidents, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, everyone with the exception of George Washington and John Adams were all secretaries of state first. So it looks like to the American people that John Quincy Adams has made this backdoor deal with Henry Clay that you scratch your back, my back, and I'll scratch yours. It becomes known as a corrupt bargain. And Andrew Jackson is going to get tremendous political points from the way this thing looks, even though there's nothing illegal or seedy about it. This is the consequence of the Constitution. I got one more thing to show you, and then we're done for the day. And that is a picture, photograph of John Quincy Adams. I always think that these are remarkable milestones. Every time we change technology, you know, we've been looking at these oil paintings of the past presidents that were all part of the founding generation. Here we are, first person who's not a founding father serving as president of the United States, and we've got a photograph. That's John Quincy Adams, president of the United States. Ranks as probably the best, if not one of the best, secretaries of state, diplomats, but someone that would be hard to get along with, have a conversation with. Yeah, he looks kind of like grumpy, right? Yeah. I'm glad you see that. He is considered in history the first minority president. This is what a minority is, a minority president. I'm not talking about racial minority. I'm not talking about any kind of gender minority or anything like that. A minority president is someone that receives less than 50% of the popular vote. We have these all the time. Okay, John Adams was a minority president. Let's see, I'd have to double check that. No, John Quincy Adams was a minority president. Donald Trump is a minority president, right? Fewer people voted for Donald Trump than Hillary Clinton, but he won more electoral votes. Now, what's unique about John Quincy Adams is that Congress cast the deciding vote as to him over Andrew Jackson. All right, that's it for the day. Any questions?